Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Kalfa. Let's talk about some wolves. Truly honored to have with Stephen and myself today. They are naturalists, wildlife filmmakers, nonprofit. They are the president and vice president of Living with Wolves. If you haven't seen the documentary, I highly recommend it. Jim and Jamie Dutcher, coming to us from Ketchum, Sun Valley in Idaho. It is a pleasure to have you both here on the podcast with us. How are you guys doing in Idaho today?
We're doing great. It's going to be a hot one, but all is good, and it's a real pleasure to be on with you guys today.
Yeah, seriously. I read Living with Wolves a few years ago, and this is like a kind of like a starstruck moment because I read that book. And I think I might have read it twice. And that was before I even started working at the wolf sanctuaries. This is a really cool full circle moment.
Well, neat. That's good to hear. That's terrific to hear, actually.
I brushed up on the documentary, and it's just so fascinating. Everything that you both have done for the better part, it's got to be 30, almost 40 years now. What led you, Jim, to start? Like, what creeped into your mind to start the Wolf Project to begin with? Because looking just over the first half of that documentary, it seemed like such an undertaking. So what was the cause for you to say, I want to try this and do this out after filming all the wildlife that you did?
Well, I started out as a wildlife filmmaker underwater, an underwater photographer. And I've always picked subjects that are rather elusive. And after that, coming up to Idaho to live in the early 80s, I filmed a film for National Geographic about beavers. You know, that's an elusive animal no one gets to see. And then mountain lions. And the next subject we picked was wolves. And they're very misunderstood and endangered species at the time. So that's how it all evolved.
Now, do you feel that you picked more elusive species because of the obvious that they're not getting as much a screen time, or did you pick them for more of a personal reason?
I just like to take people on an adventure into a place they've never been before. And I also felt sorry for the wolf and all this, all the stories of them being man-eaters. And right away you could see that wasn't true. Wolves have attacked and perhaps killed 2 people in the last 120 years. So they're not vicious, evil animals. And that's what I wanted to turn around and give another perspective to.
Absolutely. Jamie, in watching the documentary again, you were all the way on the other side of the country. What was the pull or the attraction like that? I know some of it was Jim, but what was it that made you say this was going to be your going into your life's work? Did you know it at the moment? Because you were a very prominent wildlife surgeon, I believe, or surgeon or a veterinarian. So what made you make that leap to go and stay with Jim and join this project?
Well, I wasn't quite a surgeon. I was a keeper and a vet tech at the National Zoo.
Okay.
It's okay. There was a huge attraction to Jim, and we had so much in common, and so many like interests, and it just the projects were great. When I met Jim, he was just finishing the beaver project and was starting on cougar, and I helped him with that a little bit from when I was living in Washington, D.C. To advise him on certain subjects, and then when he started the wolf project, I helped him out with some medical situations there. And it just was a natural progression. It was time for me to leave. It was for the National Zoo and move on. And it really wasn't the pull of the wolves so much as it was the pull of Jim, and the wolves were the bonus, I guess you could say.
Right. Now, obviously, these past lives that you lived prior to this wolf experience prepared you for this experience. But can you dive deeper into maybe some of the skill sets that you learned in those other fields that you really were able to apply in the field during this project?
Well, I was a wrangler on a ranch in Wyoming, and I learned so much about setting up camps and in the wilderness, photography, packing pack horses, and all those sort of things sort of fell in line. And I was 16, and I was out looking for some stray horses, and I came upon a wolf, and that wolf showed no fear, where the coyotes usually run off. This animal just stood its ground, looked at me, and as I wandered a little bit toward it, it came around and searched out where I had been standing. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. This animal is so interested in who I am. And then he had enough of me and just disappeared. And it was another 30 years. And I was back at that ranch. And it was after finishing the cougar film, mountain lion film, that I came upon another wolf. And I was looking for a new subject, and that did it. That transition was made, which is always very difficult, going from one animal to another, and how you're going to handle it.
Yeah. And I think for me, of course, photography I loved, and the animal husbandry that I specialized in, and the animal care, and just being aware of different species and what they need. And when I actually came out to join Jim, he needed a sound recordist. So I took the time to learn sound recording. And a friend of his from Hollywood came out, and I got a pretty major crash course in that. And it was interesting, and you wouldn't really normally correlate this, but, I was actually a fine art major. And for me, for instance, putting on layers of paint, it was in the same way the layers of sound, to build the story through the, through all the different sounds that you create. So it actually was quite a natural progression for me that I thought I took to pretty well.
And then she actually won a Primetime Emmy for her sounds. It made a full circle.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
Wow. And just to piggyback on that question, sorry, John. So those are sort of the skill sets that made you prepared. Did you feel prepared, or did this feel like a shot in the dark?
As much as you might feel prepared, there are always things that happen and go on that you're not really quite prepared for. You think, for instance, with all my experience at the National Zoo, and I had worked with some wolves, and I had a lot of knowledge about, reading knowledge about wolves. You think, and these animals opened up their lives to us in a way that was so unexpected and so incredibly rich. The way they are such deeply and incredible social family animals, the way they take care of each other, the way they look out for each other. It just was layer upon layer of a deeper understanding into this incredibly intelligent social family animal.
Yeah. I mean, Jim, with you in the beginning, before Jamie joined you, you were doing so much of the really raising, when you adopted the wolf pups to try and to introduce them into the pack that was already there. What sort of things were you witnessing firsthand what was the thing that blew your mind in those first couple of years before Jamie joined you full time?
Well, our, I learned first from Eric Zimmern, a wolf biologist from Austria. I was at a film festival in Bristol, England, and I told him I was thinking about wolves, and he right away said, "You really can't do that without socializing these animals to you, so they're not afraid." Wolves in the wild, they see you and they depart. They change their behavior and they run away. And seeing wolves in the wild is really, really difficult. So I had to start, and this was amazing, with puppies, bottle feeding them from the moment they open their eyes. And Jamie knew a lot about the formulas that we would need to have for young canines like this. And so she helped me out with that. There was just a huge learning curve. I thought at first, if I got an elderly male and a female, they would be the alphas. I was really wrong about that. They were just mature. And what happened is the male, he was right away dominated by one of the pups. And the female had cataract problems. And, through talking to Jamie and hiring a veterinarian ophthalmologist, we came out and we actually replaced the cataracts or the lenses in a wolf's eyes. So we set up our camp as as sort of a MASH operation, like in the Army. And this veterinarian, he did that. He also told me, he wrote and said, "I want you to put some eye drops in the eyes of the wolf before the operation. Please do that every day." And I said, "Oh boy, he doesn't know what he's getting into." I could hardly. I was trying to figure out how I would give this wolf a sedative, in a piece of meat. And anyway, so there was so much to learn, and no one really could tell us much about that. But it all paid off because the wolves did trust us, and we could get close to them and watch their behavior. And later in the project, the alpha pair, the female dug a den, and it just was amazing to watch this because the pack was so excited about new puppies. And this would be so hard to see in the wild because you usually watch wolves 800 yards away, but they were talking to each other in we called it their Chewbacca language, like from Star Wars.
Right.
And they were excited, and they would peer into the den and hear the little pups squealing there, and they'd go off shoulder to shoulder and just on tiptoes. They were so amazingly happy to have this event in their lives. Having new members to their family meant a lot.
So hearing the story makes me think, you both had such a unique relationship with this pack. What do you feel that they thought of you? Like, how do you think they perceived your presence?
I think they looked at us as maybe not truly members of their family, but but extended members of pack. Perhaps we would never consider ourselves, wolves or part. We never tried to impose ourselves on their lives. But they would, if we had to leave camp, or if we got up in the morning and left our tents, they would come up and greet us as they would greet each other. You get this big greeting and licks on the face, and then they go off and do their thing. And, it's important to note that, everything was always on their terms. If the wolves came up to us, it's because they chose to come up to us, not because we chose to come up to them. And so everything was on their terms. We never tried to dominate them whatsoever. And they never, in turn, tried to dominate us. And it was all very, very neutral. we did supply them with their meals most of the time, but we did that sort of remotely. So it was a little bit hidden, but I think they knew where those elk and deer carcasses came from. But but it was really important for us. We were more than furniture or wallpaper. We wanted to be there all the time so that they would be comfortable with us. So when we had our film gear and our sound gear out, they wouldn't stop what they were doing and go, "Oh my God, what's happening?" Everything was just a natural progression. They wouldn't stop what they were doing. They would just keep doing their thing. And that allowed us to really get into into their lives. So I think we were sort of inept family members, I guess.
So as puppies that we had raised, they became adult wolves, and we had this enclosure. We were way up into the Sawtooth with a 10,000-foot mountain in the background, and you had to travel 5 miles across a rancher's land that was private, and no one else could follow us. And we built this enclosure, and at first we realized every time and the enclosure was huge. It was like 25 acres. It just went on and on and on. And they never tried to leave. And the reason was their family was there. But we noticed that when we get our gear together and go in to meet them, that would disrupt everything. So halfway through the project, we built a camp within their territory. And then the event of us being with them was not an event at all. They just, we were part of the furniture. So
yeah,
and that really, that was everything that from then on was so much more intimate and amazing. Some of the things we saw that you just wouldn't see with radio telemetry or spotting scopes. We noticed in the winter they had sleep sinks that they would actually bed down in, and sometimes put willows or fir in and always sleep there. Or in the springtime, they ate a certain type of wildflower. Well, how could you see that in 800 yards away? Yeah.
Yeah, and it was funny when we moved our camp inside their territory. If you see pictures of it or in the film, it's surrounded by chain link, and people are like, "Oh, were you afraid of the wolves? You got to protect yourselves." It's like, no, it's so they wouldn't steal our stuff, because that's one thing the wolves were notorious for is, if you had something, it's like, ooh, maybe I want that.
Wolves are very curious.
Yeah.
Lewis and Clark had the same thing happen in their camps, and they would come into camp and they would steal things from their
boots.
Their boots.
Yeah, judging by our pack at Wolf Connection, John and I can tell you that I think that's consistent throughout all wolves. They all steal your things.
Yeah. Don't bring any loose thing in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't put anything down the ground. But it's so easy to see how, wolves, which of course are the mother of all dogs, how we were able to develop really the symbiotic relationship between humans and wolves and then dogs, because we do, we have a curiosity about each other. We do live rather similar emotional family lives. And it was just a natural progression. We're just so interested in each other and how to do things.
So why was putting your tent in the middle of their territory not the first option? What was the thought process behind that?
Well, we just didn't know very much about them, and we thought
it would disrupt them.
Yeah, and that we figured the night belonged to the wolves. We shouldn't go into their territory when the sun went down, and that was just our theory. But we realized it was very disruptive every time we did go in there. It worked out.
No, absolutely.
Makes total sense.
How do you feel the project is looked upon this far out of it now? Do you ever get anyone pushing back and saying, well, these wolves are now somewhat domesticated because you put yourself in their line of sight every single day? Is that ever come up? Is that ever a conversation that has to be had? I know there are people that sometimes think that if a wolf is around humans as much as they are, they become habituated, they become somewhat domesticated. Did you feel that at any point during the project? I know you guys balanced that out as best you could. So what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, we would get pushback like that. It would be odd if somebody didn't question that, and really we welcomed it because it gives you an opportunity to explain that all behavioral studies ever done on wolves have been done in captivity. You can't
social behavior.
Yeah, social behavior. You cannot study their social behavior in the wild. You can't get close enough. Most, if not all, social studies have been done in very small enclosures of 1 to 3 acres. And a lot of times there are biologists that would come in and they dominate the wolves, and that automatically changes their behavior. You've totally changed everything. We had the largest wolf enclosure in the world. We never tried to impose ourselves on the wolves. We did have to habituate them to us because otherwise it would not have been safe for the wolves or potentially for us. You wanted them to be comfortable in their environment. So we bottle fed them, as Jim said, but we didn't treat them as pets. They didn't know their names. They wouldn't come to you when you called them. Everything, as I said, was on their terms. And that allowed them to go live out their social lives. We know from all kinds of studies that wolves travel long distances, they bring down large prey. And that wasn't what this study was about. And, when then people talk about, they were domesticated. Well, domestication takes place over tens of thousands of years, and they were habituated to us. And the detriment of that was that at the end of the project, and we knew this, the wolves could not be set free. Not only would it have been illegal at the time to release wolves, but they lost the one thing they needed to survive in the wild, which was a fear of humans. So we knew that these wolves would be ambassadors for their wild brethren for their lifetime. So, but we're very comfortable with it because there's no other way to get into the deep, intimate social life of these animals without doing it this way.
I noticed that you wanted to know a little bit about which wolf fascinated us the most, or we learned the most from. And that, for me, was the alpha kamats. And we call him the alpha. It's a breeding male, and there's a breeding female, and there's a movement lately to not call them alphas, but I thought they were alphas, not that they, this wolf was very benevolent with his pack, but he led with kindness, and he seemed to be very well respected. And often in the afternoons, we'd go out and just sort of sit down and not film and just let them be themselves. And being close to them like we were, you could see if a sound came from the forest, the surrounding forest, like a branch broke or something like that, it would always be Kamats, the alpha, who would stand up to this perceived danger. He would be the one that immediately got up and went to investigate. And you can sort of visualize how easy it is to kill the leaders, because if a hunter entered their territory, the larger leading members of the pack, the alphas, would be the first to go forward to the perceived danger and stand there. And they're usually a little bit bigger. So alphas are often the ones that are targeted and taken out. And that just leaves you with a dysfunctional pack, very confused.
No parents.
No leadership. And it's very traumatic. And when you hunt wolves like this, and it actually makes it worse for ranchers. If they would understand that killing off a pack, you have 12 to 20 wolves in a pack, and that's a great thing to have, because then they're predictable. They go after the big elk, they bring it down together as a team, and they protect that carcass until it's completely finished. But if you start hunting them and breaking up this this leadership, and you have, instead of 12 wolves in a pack, you have 2 or 3. Well, usually one wolf always stays with the puppies, and 2 or 3 wolves really would have a very hard time bringing down a large 700-pound bull elk. And so what happens? They go after easier prey, slower, easier livestock. And that's why it makes it worse for ranchers. If they would just leave them alone and study them, not put their salt blocks next to the dens, because they'll use the same den year after year. But, just respect and learn from this amazing animal, we wouldn't have such a conflict.
Yeah. So when you see that happening, and I, since we're segueing into this, I'll just talk about it now. I mean, now with what's going on in Idaho, and we've had so many conversations on this podcast already about coexistence. We spoke with Karen Vardaman, we spoke with Suzanne Asha Stone. So these individuals who are really pioneering this coexistence formula for ranchers, for cattle grazers, for sheep grazers, who are able to put these things into practice, that they can coexist with carnivores. It's not just wolves, bears, cougars, mountain lions, things of that sort. What is the feeling in Idaho now that State Bill 1211 is passed, it's signed into law? I believe it goes into effect July 7th. What are the, what's the process and the implementations that are going to happen now in Idaho for that?
It's going to be devastating. And, it's a bill that really has a minority of people behind it, not the majority. I mean, even the Fish and Game Department was not for this particular bill. It's truly going to be devastating, and it's going to be devastating for ranchers we know who ranch with predators in a very predator-friendly way, implementing techniques to keep not only wolves but other large carnivores away from their livestock. It will have a devastating effect on them by the amount of killing that'll be going on, and it's. It's an all-out slaughter. The methods being used to kill wolves are devastating. I mean,
Yeah, you can run them down with vehicles. You can use motorized hang gliders to shoot them from the air. You can shoot them with night vision scopes. You can bait them.
Hang gliders. I've never even heard of that.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. But, it really is going to give Idaho a black eye. It's eliminating any chance we have of developing ecotourism. In Yellowstone, 150,000 visitors come to the park just to see wolves. And that equals, because of a university study at Bozeman, that equals $35 million extra added to the local economy. $35 million a year. So what's happening in Idaho is crazy. The writers of this bill claim that wolves are a threat to humans, but that hasn't happened. And in the 35 years now, as wolves have been reintroduced, there haven't been any cases of any attacks. And there's 2.8 million cattle and sheep in our state. And wolves killed 170 of the 2.8 million cattle and sheep. And people don't come to Idaho to see cattle and sheep.
Yeah, and the idea being that they want to reduce the population by 90%. How are wolves allowed to be wolves? I mean, you can't have functioning families. They can't. It really is an all-out slaughter to completely decimate an animal that is an endangered species success story. So much money was spent taxpayer dollars to bring the wolf back as deemed by the ESA. And it was hugely successful. Only just, to have the war on the wolf all over again. It's devastating.
Yeah. So where is this disconnect? Because I've asked this a couple of times for the last couple of episodes we had with people who are in Idaho or in the western part, is there seems to be a disconnect, and maybe it's just information, education, I don't know what it is, that there's this number that people have in mind that there should be X amount of wolves per state because of the way, I guess, the ESA was written up, because of the recovery plan. And I've heard these things, and I don't know if it's lost in translation. And so that's where they feel that the numbers are so outrageous, because if you look at the number, I believe there's 1,300 wolves, 1,500 wolves, I believe, in Idaho. So you're talking however many percentages. 50, yeah. So there's however many percentages over the initial number, which was 150. Does that get lost in translation? Yeah, the goal. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah.
It does. And I think that, elk numbers are at some of their all-time highest numbers. They were arbitrary numbers that were set with absolutely no real scientific study behiund it.
150 wolves.
150 wolves, 10 breeding pairs.
Yeah.
But nothing there was nothing taken into consideration about, okay, a wolf pack is a family. A family can be, they might have 8 pups, 4 might survive, that wolf packs can be large, they can be medium sized. And it's an arbitrary, they're arbitrary numbers that they will use to fall back on. But you said this is the number. And it's not based on any real science. That's something they fall back on. But it's also, I hate to say, it's a hatred for the federal government.
Yeah.
You have groups of people that, wolves were brought back by the feds. They hate the feds. However, they do want their roads paved and their mail delivered on time, and their subsidy checks. So, that's interesting. But, and then you have people who just really are not educated. And because unfortunately, there was a window of opportunity to have wolves reintroduced. It was extraordinarily successful, but the groundwork of education was not done. And that's actually where Jim and I have come in through our films and through our nonprofit Living with Wolves. We do a tremendous amount of educational outreach, really trying to dispel the myths, trying to educate people as to what wolves are really all about. And it's really rather interesting when we do live multimedia presentations all around the world, all over the country. And, we'll have people that are very anti-wolf that will come to our presentations, and they'll come up to us at the end and say, I really wanted to kill wolves, but I can't now. I didn't know they were family animals. I had no idea. And, when you hear something like that, it gives you hope. I mean, we had a rancher come to one of our presentations in Texas. And he was dragged there by his wife and not wanting to be there. And at the end, he had tears in his eyes. And he's like, I get it now. It's just, a little education can go a long way. And they're people you're never going to change, no matter what. They don't want to know the facts. They believe in the myth of wolves, even though these people had never lived with wolves before. Especially like there's one of our favorite ones is that, the wolves that are here now are these supersized giant wolves from Canada. And they're 300 pounds and they're a different kind of wolf. Well, the last time I checked, there is no wall between Canada and the United States. Wolves, gray wolves pass back and forth and their genes pass back and forth all the time. It's the same wolf. And, once you kind of pose that to people and it's like, oh, okay, then that argument's shot. Let's try a different one. And it's just kind of really setting the stage for what's really going on. And most people when they hear the facts and know what wolves are really all about, start to change. But like I said, you will always have that group that won't.
Yeah, and I think it makes it more difficult, as you're saying.
How do you address something when the topic you're trying to discuss isn't even really the problem? It is a political resistance in some way. And I think in some cases, rural communities just are resisting the idea that urban communities are voting for them. Like they're not being heard or that their voices are not at the table. So in that like human respect of feeling like you're not being heard, or like someone who's not familiar with your story is deciding for you, whether that's 100% accurate or not, really is not the point. The fact is they're acting on that belief. So I don't want to say like whose fault is it or who's doing is it or who's responsible for it, but you get the point. Who needs to be communicating better? How can these numbers be set more based on scientific fact? And how can we have clear communication throughout the process in the future?
Yeah, and I think it's really important that that you have to listen to people. There are people out there who are unjustifiably afraid, but in their heads they are. And you have to respect that. And you have to understand why they are so concerned and address their concerns and understand where they're coming from to make them feel comfortable. We deal a lot with the ranching community and have done work with a lot of ranchers who have had issues with wolves predating on livestock, but not only wolves, but bears and cougar. And the ones that we've gotten to employ methods that are just better for predators, non-lethal method to live with predators. When they employ these, they don't have problems. They don't have problems with wolves or other predators. It just takes the willingness then to change the way that you have been doing something. Over 100 years ago, ranchers were ranching with predators. You had to be alert. You had to have range riders. Well, with the loss of predators, you could let your livestock go out on the open range and you just don't check on them for 3 months. And you can't do that. And some people will not move away from that because this is the way I'm doing it and I have to do this. And other ranchers are like, okay, well, that's really interesting. Let's try this. And it would be a wonderful thing if we could get more money invested in helping ranchers employ non-lethal methods to help protect their livestock than just paying out for dead livestock. Right. Or just taking out packs of wolves to help them eventually help themselves. It's just range riders and employing flattery, which are the flags that wave at night and lights and sirens. Cleaning up carcasses when you can. Knowing where den sites are and not running your cattle over the den site, moving them somewhere else. Is a real simple one. Because if you do take out a pack of wolves that you happen to be ranching with, eventually another pack will move in.
Yeah.
And it's better to ranch with the pack than the pack you don't.
What's the information that you guys, how do you present the arguments for wolves when you guys are giving your talks, when you're talking to people who are, maybe they're so far, and I always look at the extremes too, because it is on both sides. There are people they don't want to touch wolves at all. And there are people who want to kill all wolves. So Stephen and I like to go through what we call the radical middle. So what's the middle that you guys try and dive in between to really give these people everything that they need to know to make the informed decision?
Yeah, it's the radical middle. It's like we like to talk about. We have it up on our website, and we'll talk about it in our presentations. You've got the perceptions of wolves. You've got this evil wolf of nightmare. You've got this spirit wolf. This all perfect wolf, and then you've got just the wolf of empirical science, which is just data and nothing else. And we like to say we know the social wolf. The wolf for what he or she really is. Neither demon nor deity. They are, wolves are a keystone species and so important to a healthy ecosystem. They make everything better. Wolves are the only predators that actually keep elk moving. Where you've got bear and cougar are more opportunist and ambush hunters. Wolves keep them moving, so it's good for the health of the elk and the deer, and it's good for the health of the land.
And when they're moving, they can spot the older, weaker, injured animals and take those out.
And
that helps the pack.
Yeah, and I'm sure you guys know, and your audience knows all about the trophic cascade and how wolves have made rivers better. That's been all over the place, and elk had been moved up into the hills, and which then allows the riverbanks to improve, and willows and trees can grow back. So you have songbirds coming back. Water's cooler for fish. One really cool thing is that besides the fact that wolves, especially in Yellowstone, cut the coyote population in half by either killing them or chasing them away, that actually helped the pronghorn antelope population, because pronghorn antelope will actually seek out wolf dens to give birth, because wolves will not hunt pronghorn. They're just too fast. They just don't bother. And so they feel safer there because they know they won't be preyed upon by coyotes, because coyotes aren't going to come around. So it's this great relationship that wolves have with the natural world is one thing that we like to talk about, but also all the great personal stories that we have experienced with our pack of wolves, and stories from researchers and biologists that we know in Yellowstone and Denali National Park of just the incredible superhuman lives these wolves lead. They just are amazing creatures. And when you can tell these stories to people, and they're not really quite prepared for what they're going to get, it does make a difference. They're just, in our pack, we had an omega female that was killed by a mountain lion. Do you want to tell that story? It's a good one.
Yeah. This omega, the bottom of the pack, was always picked on by the pack. So she would always go off by herself just to avoid being harassed. And she went missing. Couldn't find her. She didn't come when the rest of the wolves fed, even though she would feed last, but she wouldn't eat at all. She was gone. And we found her carcass, and it had been eviscerated. The fur had been licked off, and stomach was opened up, and it, of course, was dead. And we could see fur of this animal way up in this wolf, way up in a tree. And we saw crude claw marks at the base of the tree where the wolves had heard what was going on and chased the cat up the tree. And we saw claw marks high in the tree of the cougar. And but what was most interesting of all was how the pack reacted. Mataki, this omega, was always instigating play, and the wolves would play all the time. Every day there was play. Almost every hour there was play. They pull tail, they chase each other, they tease each other. But they stopped playing for 6 weeks. And they also stopped howling the way they usually howl. They usually gather together and they howl as a group, and they sort of celebrate life that way, and they get all excited. But after she died, they would hardly howl at all. And when they did, they wouldn't even stand up to howl. And it was more mournful and searching. And that went on for another 6 weeks too. So, what we saw there is the pack was mourning the loss of this wolf.
And, how can, we see it in our dogs, so it makes perfect sense. And, we had another omega Lakota, who was always picked on by the rest of the pack, and he developed a friendship with Motzi, who was our beta wolf. And Motzi was sort of the second in command and kind of the puppy sitter of the pups. And the two of them would spend time together alone, and they would play with each other. And Motzi would let Lakota jump on his back and be, bigger than him, and they'd play around. And it just kind of gave Lakota a break from being picked on. But one of the really super cool things we saw when we were we were shooting in film. So of course, you shoot your film and then you have to go send it off, and it comes back developed and you're looking at it. And we were realizing what we were seeing we would slow the footage down. There were times when the rest of the pack would be picking on Lakota, and Motzi would actually come into the fray and break the whole thing up, get into the middle of it to let Lakota get away. And Motzi could change the subject. And it just really showed you this incredible friendship and protection that he showed for this wolf. And, in fact, we wrote a children's bedtime story, A Friend for Lakota, about bullying, how some of the other mid-ranking wolves would bully him, but Motzi was his protector. And, one of the cool things later on, when Lakota was allowed to retire from the Omega position, it would have been a perfect opportunity for him to start picking on the next Omega, but he didn't. It's sort of like he knew. It's like, hey, buddy, I know where you've been. I'm not getting involved.
So at the end of our project, when we moved the wolves to the Nez Perce Reservation, and they built a similar enclosure and everything, we carried them up there in transport crates that we borrowed from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And we had the puppies in one crate and the alpha in another, and the omega and all the mid-ranking wolves. We had, 8 or 9 crates. And we let out the puppies first. We let out the alpha right after that, and everything was fine. And then we wouldn't let out the omega until every other wolf was out of the crate, because he would have gotten picked on. They would have just jumped on him for having that privilege. So all the wolves were released, and the pack was ready to go, and the omega's cage or crate was open, but he wouldn't come out. He was afraid, and he was inside there for quite some time. And his brother went over to the entrance of the crate, and they whined back and forth and spoke to each other. What they said, I don't know. But eventually, Lakota came out with shoulder to shoulder with his brother and joined the other wolves. But his brother, the alpha, would not leave his brother behind. And it was very sweet. And I remember a hunter from Wisconsin wrote, he said that, that brought him to tears. He was always afraid of wolves. And he learned, from watching that in our film, that, the wolves are much more emotional and kinder animals than he thought they would be.
Yes. Speaking of the rehoming of them at the end of the project, I was curious about this. It's wild how you found what seems to be like a perfect situation for the pack to be rehomed after the project ended. But how did that conversation go with the tribe? Like, what were some of the elements of that conversation? Did you look at other places as well, or was this just this was the place?
Well, they came to us, and they were just given the right to manage the reintroduced wolves that were coming back and being put in central Idaho and Yellowstone at the time. And they came down to meet the pack, and we started talking about the fact that they would let us lease land on their reservation to build this enclosure. And we thought it would be a really wonderful place for them. The reason we had to give up the pack is the Forest Service wouldn't extend our permits anymore. We had done that once or twice before, and they said no more. And after 6 years of living with these wolves, we had to find a home for them, and that's where where they ended up on the Nez Perce Reservation. But that story about the wolf holding back in the crate repeated itself when the wolves were reintroduced to Idaho. And the federal government had them all the crates lined up in a remote area of Idaho. And they opened all the crates and one wolf wouldn't come out. And just wouldn't come out. So the veterinarian with a rabies pole went over and put the loop around the wolf that was in the crate and started pulling the wolf out. And the photographers took pictures of this growling, terrified wolf. And that picture was spread across the nation. Wolves are reintroduced to Idaho. So we had a big, vicious, frightened wolf. And no one really knew the backstory.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, the misconceptions I know run rampant. Did you both think at the time when the project ended, because this was before the introductions happened in both Yellowstone and Idaho, your project itself. Did you feel that there was you almost gave the push, whether it be, knowing or not, to the the North America to say, yeah, we can have wolves here and it can work? Because I looked at the timeline and I just in my brain as I'm watching the end of it, I go, this was before it coincided right with Idaho and Yellowstone.
Right at the same
time. So was there anything that correlated with that for you too? Did you feel that at all?
I think Sawtooth Pack opened the door for their wild cousins and introduced wolves to Americans before their wild cousins were introduced to the lands of central Idaho. And we feel really good that we were a part of that. The Yellowstone biologists came over and studied our enclosure, and we helped design the enclosures that they kept the wolves in the Lamar Valley of Yellowstone. We learned a lot in those 6 years how to do that, and so that the wolves wouldn't climb and get out, or how to open gates when you have 4 or 5 feet of snow, and the little techniques like that. And so we were part of that process. We're very pleased to have been.
Yeah, I'd like to think that we helped open the door.
Yeah,
for them.
Yeah, the timeline sort of speaks to that. But is there anything you would have done different if you had the chance to do this whole thing again?
Live with them longer.
Yeah.
I think probably the most important thing, the project was done on Forest Service land, and with Forest Service and USDA permits, and there was not a viable private piece of land anywhere that was as perfect as what we were able to find on Forest Service land. I think, if we were to do it over, to have a permanent piece of land with, where they could have lived out their lives forever without having to, because we knew at the beginning of the project they were going to have to be moved somewhere else. That would have been probably
a private piece of land.
Yeah, because that was the most painful thing, was to
say goodbye.
To say goodbye to them. And it's something we regret every day. And we get letters from people saying what horrible people we were that we let that happen.
Jeez.
And how could we do that? And it was a very horrible and complicated thing for us as well. And we did everything we could. We trained special people to go with them, who would stay with them and be our surrogates, so that we knew that they were taken care of and that everything would be good for them. And, no matter what, you can't win. So we did the best we could for them. I think gave them all really good lives till the end.
Yeah, that's really tough. I read something in another interview you had done about whether you would do this project again, and the quote was, the political climate is such that we would never be able to get the permits again, nor to fly under the radar of the very vocal anti-wolf community that has sprung up. Can you say more about why it would be so much harder now to do this?
Yeah, I think we were lucky. We snuck under the radar. There was a Forest Service chief in this area, Carl Pence. He liked what we did. We had a special use permit with the U.S. Forest Service, and he would actually bring other Forest Service managers from other states to see our showcase project. He was that proud of it. But he said, I was really naive, and I was up in a neighboring town that didn't have the same feelings that the central Idaho Sun Valley resort area had about wolves. And they gave him a very difficult time. And that was part of the reason that we just couldn't extend our permits. I think the anti-wolf people hadn't got organized yet, and we were fortunate.
Yeah, we were accused of spreading wolf propaganda, and it's a shame for people to look at an endangered species, something that only makes our landscape better, as a political issue. It just shouldn't be, and it's wrong to think about it that way. But now it is, especially more now than it was then. So it would just be too difficult, I think, to get it done again.
Why do you think this animal, this species specifically, is something that touches everybody? You don't hear this about tigers. You don't hear this about elephants. You know what I mean? It's whales, sharks. It's always wolves. And why, because you guys have been in it for so long, what is it about the species that just touches a nerve with someone one way or the other?
I think it's a few things. I think because people wouldn't have dogs without wolves. We had a very close relationship very early on in our evolution, and wolves can be the best of us, and they're a reflection of that. And I think people, especially that have this adverse reaction to wolves, it's very unusual because they'll love their dogs, but there's not a hate they hold for any other animal like they hold for a wolf. And that's really hard to wrap your head around, because that wolves gave us so much in our beloved dog. We would not have been able to domesticate all other livestock animals without the domestication of the wolf into the dog first. And I think that it's the dog that won't kennel up, won't obey them, their wildness,
And that irritates certain people.
Yeah. It's a lot to unpack. It's when you think about early humans and wolves had this this relationship where they would help each other hunt, and then eventually we domesticated the wolf into the dog, and they probably helped domesticate us as well. You have that, and then on the downside, that then allowed human beings to become more pastoral. They stayed in one place. They weren't hunter-gatherers anymore. Well, then wolves become competition. Then you start seeing them as the enemy and not as, a partner or, just another creature to be revered. And then you have, the development of religion, and you have, the pastoral lamb and the devil dog, and you have early wars and plagues where people were dying in droves and being buried in shallow graves. And you've got to picture this image of, wolves are opportunists, of wolves coming into a gravesite area and, digging up someone's loved ones and feeding on it. And you're hearing that growl and that snarl and just, oh my God, it's the devil. And when it's really just their language, but at the same time, you've got this fear developing, and then Grimm's fairy tales and all the other fairy tales, and the wolf then representing everything evil in humans, and we've just carried that all the way through. And I think, it's a lot to unpack.
I mean, what do you both feel about the future? Specifically in Idaho, because that's your home base, that's where you are. What can be done with it? Maybe nothing. I don't know if anything could be in regards to SB 1211 or any of the management moving forward. Is there something that people can do? Are there places that people can speak to or call, or what do you feel about the outlook for the population out there?
We're trying the best we can, and we're writing letters. We're trying to talk to senators and people in power, decision makers. We're ready to travel back east if we have appointments, and we've done this before. We've gone to the Interior Department and the Department of Agriculture, and we've brought with them advisory board members that have worked. Carter Niemeyer, for one, who worked for the USDA as an animal damage control officer, and he was in charge of killing wolves, trapping wolves. And we've taken him back to talk to the people that organize those programs, and he has told them. He said ranchers are making it up. That he goes and he opens up carcasses, and he examines how a wolf or some other animal killed this cow, and 9 times out of 10 it wasn't a wolf. He would tell them. And so we've taken people back to Washington to try to change policy, and we won't stop. We'll continue trying to change this. To kill 90% of the wolves in Idaho, we have 1,500 wolves, maybe. Bring it down to 150. We have 20,000 bears in Idaho. We have 50,000 coyotes in Idaho. Idaho is a huge state. We have 2,000 or 3,000 cougars.
Wow.
1,500 wolves is not enough to form a sustainable population. Bring them down to 150, they're just going to go after more and more livestock.
Yeah, and I think, through the Idaho legislature, things aren't going to change anytime soon. Groups that litigate are looking into litigation. And as Jim mentioned, we're looking at the federal level and working hard at that. And, one thing that I would really encourage your listeners to do is, I know it sounds futile, but write letters. Seriously, write letters. Write letters, make phone calls. And even though, people don't want you to really know it, if for instance, if you're concerned about wolves in Idaho, well, the majority of these wolves live on your federal land and returned with your federal tax dollars. And you do have a voice.
Right.
And your voice has to be loud. And, to write state officials, to write your own state officials, if you're not in Idaho, about how you feel about the situation, write Washington and just inundate them. It does make a difference. It actually does. And I know it just seems like it's a quagmire and we're not going to get anything done. But really, if anything good is going to happen for wolves, I think it's going to happen with this administration. And we have to fight extra hard for it. So, any support that people can give, and letter writing campaigns, it's really important.
We have a strategy. We have a 5 point strategy of stopping trapping, and all the way up to put them back on the endangered species list. If they're going to kill 90% of our wolves here, they should be protected. They were endangered species.
Yeah, and there's several different routes we can go.
Yeah,
that they can offer not only wolves but other predators protection. It's time.
Do you ever feel like this 90% killing 90% of the wolves thing, how sort of dramatic it sounds, is going to lend itself at all to long-term special protections?
Yes, it.
Yeah.
I mean, that it is so out there. It's such an absurd killing bill, slaughter bill. That's maybe the only thing that might play in wolves' favor, that, it's so outrageous that something has got to be done, where other legislations can sort of slip through the radar a little bit because it's not that bad. But yeah, Idaho has made it extra bad.
Yeah, I wondered that when the bill went through. I was thinking, why would they want to draw this much attention to this concept? Yeah. It really doesn't make any sense. But also, I'm thinking just in another way, it's just like this battle it's obviously not over, but wolf reintroduction's been, by definition, been successful in a lot of ways. I mean, once they're back in Colorado, there's red wolves coming up from New Mexico. Before you know it, there's this continental divide, connectivity that I'm assuming is just going to naturally spread across the West. That learning to live with them would just be the logical next step, because it's kind of, I mean, after Colorado, it's kind of done. I mean, they'll spread throughout the West.
Well, that's a key word there, logical next step. So, you're absolutely right. I mean, it would be so much easier than just constantly trying to slaughter these animals and making things worse for ranchers all the way around, which they don't want to hear.
Yeah, there's so much, like you said, there's so much to unpack, and there's so much that there's a lot of work to be done. And it's, you both have done incredible work, and you're still doing incredible work. I only have one last question for the two of you before we let you go, because I know you have to leave. When you both hear the word wolf, what is something that comes to your mind?
Well, immediately the hair on the back of my neck goes up, in a good way. And I just get kind of tingly, I just feel, they're just, wolves make me feel good. As I said, they're neither demon nor deity, and they're just, an awesome, incredible animal that we need to keep on the landscape, and we need to learn from. There's so much we can learn from wolves about being better people, doing the right thing.
Yeah.
What about you, Jim? What do you think of when you hear?
Yeah, what do you
wolf?
think about Jim?
When I hear the word wolf, I think of our incredible privileged experience to have lived with them for 6 years. Camp with them in a tent with freezing temperatures and 4 or 5 feet of snow, and
being miserable.
Coming out in the morning and them greeting us and coming up to us and sometimes licking our faces. Jamie called it like being caught in a soft, fluffy tornado with fangs.
Sounds like Jax.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Yeah. It was an amazing experience.
Yeah. Please tell everybody where they can get information on your organization and where you guys are speaking and things of that sort. Please tell everybody where they can go for that.
Absolutely. Please visit our website, livingwithwolves.org. There you can sign up for our newsletter, get more information, learn all about us, all about wolves. We have amazing resources for teachers and kids. We've got a teaching guide that we put together with National Geographic for ages K through 12, and home guides if people are interested. And we also put updated information about what's going on. And right now, with us just starting to come out of COVID, we don't have any speaking engagements planned. But, those can be found on our website. And if you sign up for our newsletter, we can, we send out little blasts where we might be, or, join Living with Wolves on Facebook. And, we've got several books with National Geographic, and we encourage everybody to go out and learn what they can and help be a voice for wolves, because we can't do it alone. You guys know that. We guys are doing it too. So we need an army of people to be speaking for wolves. So.
When we learned that the wolves eventually died off, and the life of a wolf is short. And sometimes in Yellowstone is 3 or 4 years, 5 to 10 years maybe is average. And knowing that Kamats died, and the pack eventually died one after another. And when one wolf died, Wyack and her brother was standing posted by her side, wouldn't leave her. But I guess what you wonder what we meant to them, and I wish I could tell them that we went on telling their story. They taught us so much, and we go on telling their story.
Yeah, this has honestly been such a pleasure to have both of you on and to really dive into this conversation. You both are welcome anytime. If there's any updates in Idaho, you have an open invitation to contact Stephen and myself, and we'll fire up the mics and we'll have a discussion. It was great. And it's a pleasure to meet you both, at least over Zoom. Hopefully we'll make a trip to Idaho at some point. I'm sure Stephen and myself, and we'll have to keep this going. Sure. But thank you guys so much.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you so much for having us. And it was a pleasure. And if there's ever anything we can do for you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you.
Absolutely.
It's a hard fight we're all going to be fighting.
Yeah. But we're in it together. Yeah. So that's the best part, is we're part of our own pack, which is great. Howls to all of you out there. Thank you to Jim and Jamie Dutcher. Stephen and I will be with you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Looking to support Wolf Connection or sponsor one of the wolves in our pack? Just go to wolfconnection.org, click on the donate tab, and find out more information.